Let's continue our journey on building the Azure Firewall infrastructure. And in this section, we are going to test the internet outbound connectivity from the VM, which we created, which is a part of the subnet. I'm still logging to this VM from the firewall IP address. So let's try to test the internet connectivity, and that shouldn't work. So let me try to browse something, and it should fail because we have not allowed or configured any of the rule which should allow all this connectivity. So to make it internet enabled, now what we need to do, we need to do the source NAT. And source NAT means a IP which is assigned to the firewall that is going to use as a overload IP address. So there is a private range which will be overloaded to the public IP address on the firewall. So let's make the changes on the firewall and then we will test this connectivity again. From the portal, you can go under rules, classic, and we had only created one rule, which is the DNAT rule. Under the network section, you see nothing. Similarly, I have not configured anything under the application rule collection. So you can do your deny or allow for the traffic from this section, but you should know the exact IP address for source and destination. Similarly, if you want to play with FQDN, then you can configure those rules under the application rule collection. This network section you can use. Maybe you're using some external DNS, so you can allow those DNS entries basically from here, and then the same DNS can be configured on the VM. So I'm not going to do that. So let's create and allow google.com from application rule. So I will just name it as app out. It can start from 100. I'm going to allow this traffic. And this is FQDN tag, which I'm not going to use. This is just a collection of the IP address belongs to Azure. And I'm going to use this targeted FQDN. So here I can just mention this is for Google, and source type is going to be IP address. Source is going to be, I will just allow any. However, you have option if you have multiple subnets and you know those ranges, you can choose what you want to allow, what you want to deny, something like that. Protocol, HTTP, HTTPS, and here you can basically mention whatever the URL you want to allow. So in this case, this is going to be the google.com. Let's add this rule. It shouldn't take longer. We can refresh and see. So this rule is basically added, but you should give allow a couple of seconds so it is properly implemented, and when you test it, then it should be effective. And from here, the VM, you can see this google.com, it works as expected. If I open something else, it shouldn't work. So for example, let me try bbc.com. It should fail because we have only allowed one FQDN. What you can do, you can basically allow all the IP addresses, and let's try to do that. So I'm going to edit this rule, and instead of Google, let me allow everything, and I will save it. It is updating the rule, and let me try to refresh from here. I will give a couple of seconds. The moment rule is implemented, it should refresh automatically also. and this works. So at this moment, if you are going to open any of the URL, that should work. So let's try to see where is my ip.com. And this time I should see an IP address which belongs to the firewall. So this works. However, a couple of more topics in the design consideration you need to keep in mind. So let's discuss on that track. Inside the firewall, you have a DNS tab, and this DNS tab, if you go there, by default, this is disabled. You can enable it. You can also use DNS servers, which is provided by Azure by default, or you can also mention any of the external DNS server. Maybe you get it from your ISP. In this case, I will just put 8888. And this firewall can also act as a DNS proxy. That means if enabled, the firewall will listen on port 53 and will forward DNS request to the DNS server specified above. So that option is also available. For a small scale deployment or for a lab purpose, whatever we did, you may not observe the complexity of the SNAT. However, when there is a large scale deployment, it gets little complicated. So Azure Firewall basically provides 2496 SNAT port per public IP address. You can associate up to 250 public IP addresses here. So that is basically going to create a pool to accommodate a large scale where you can support number of connections. You can also use these individual IPs, or you can also go for a prefix. So let's take a look from the portal how it looks like, how we can associate more IP addresses. Under public IP address, you can see there's a one IP address which is basically configured during the installation or the deployment of the firewall. You have option to add more IP addresses. So you can just put some name and then the IP which you need to configure, it will be populated here and you can choose it from the list. So let's try to create a prefix and then associate that here. The option you can choose, either you can create public IP address or public IP prefix. So prefix is something very, very important when it comes to the whitelisting. So instead of giving random IP addresses to your application provider or the service provider, what you can do, you can create a prefix. Maybe we'll look into, and that completely depend on your requirement, how big is the prefix you need. So you can go for Microsoft owned and you can also bring your own IP prefix. And here you can choose, so let's take a look, /2. I do not have quota available, so I won't be able to configure this option for sure. So let's go back and try to create a public IP address. pip2, and this should be zone redundant. I will leave rest of the things default. It is submitted for deployment. Let this complete it and we go back. So this is succeeded. I can go to the resource. So let's go back to the firewall. Under the firewall, choose your firewall, then public IP address. And here you can associate another IP address. So let's say pip2 And now we should see the second IP address which was created, and we can add it here. It is still updating. It is still updating it. So basically, what I mean to say here, you can associate multiple random IPs, or if you have a whitelisting requirement where you need to do not want basically to update or give those random IP to the third party, then you can go for the prefix option as well. This is still updating it. My deployment is still running. And now we see there are two IP addresses associated, and those are going to basically part of the pool when it comes to the SNAT. So technically, the 2400 some ranges I was showing you, which comes from one IP address, now you're going to have the double of those numbers. Let's make it more interesting. So far, we know it only gives you 2496 SNAT port per public IP address, and the maximum IP address you can associate with the firewall is going to be 250. So technically, it is going to give you this range. It may not be enough for your deployment. Then what is the option you have? Some large-scale environments may require manually associating up to 100 of public IP addresses to the firewall in terms to meet the demand of large-scale workload. And that can be very tedious and challenging job in terms of management. This is where you can introduce a NAT gateway. And if you have not seen the NAT gateway video, you can go to the list and see that. This NAT gateway can be easily deployed to the same subnet where you have your Azure Firewall, and that can automatically scale connections and filter traffic through the firewall before connecting to the internet. The benefit you are going to get, it gives you 64512 SNAT port per public IP address, and the maximum IP addresses you can allocate to a NAT gateway is going to be 16. So technically this is going to be this much, which is higher than what you get when you use 250 IP addresses on the firewall. So this is the benefit you see. We are not done at with the complexity. So you can definitely integrate your NAT gateway with the firewall, but that is going to bring more complexity into the picture. So let's take a look how it impacts your design and architecture. So when you go to the NAT gateway, that is also going to be the managed services. If you click create, the option you are going to see the availability zone. If you mention no zone, it will automatically be chosen by your Azure, or you need to choose where exactly you want to deploy this NAT gateway. When you compare with the firewall, you remember either you can go for the zonal deployment, or if you want high availability, then you need to choose those zones where the next scaled up instance will be turned on. Since your outbound traffic goes from the NAT gateway, in terms of the zone failure, your outbound traffic will be completely impacted. So it's a trade-off what you want to choose. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next section.